right, last one for you. And we're going to fast forward over 6 years here. November 12th, 1993.
November 12th.
Another zig. It's not pro wrestling.
Oh, first UFC.
Yes. Yeah. So I remember reading all the observers kind of into this show. Were you always thinking that if the UFC or another organization was putting this stuff together, because there were a lot of copycats after, were you thinking that, okay, this is something that I'm going to cover as long as it's successful, like from the first show, or did it take some thinking about what your readership was and, you know, who like this new sport that you're sort of going to have to learn as everyone is learning about it? Like, what was your mentality when it came to covering this stuff?
I was intrigued by the idea of it. You know, like these guys of different disciplines all in a fight with no rules. It was very intriguing. But the key on why I covered it, I mean, well, there's a couple of things. Number one, the local promoter for the first show was Zane Bresloff, who I was friends with, and he's always pushing it on me. And this is going to be the biggest thing, blah, 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 which it wasn't. But the key was Ken Shamrock, because Ken Shamrock was a pro wrestling star in Japan with Pancras, and before that with PWFG and UWF. And he was like Ken was a legitimate star. Like when they would do the polls for top foreigner, you know, Ken was top 5 among all the foreigners. And this is when like everybody went to Japan, you know, so, you know, ahead of Sting and a lot of people like that. I mean, Ken was a big, big star. So because Ken Shamrock was involved, it was a big deal in Japan and a big deal to me. So, and Gerard Gordeau was in the first one, who had done a famous match with Akira Maeda. So that's another, name. And then, God, were there any others? No, I mean, I think those were the two. And then pretty quickly, like Dan Severn, who was a pro wrestler, came in, and Ken became a big star. So, you know, that's what happened. But as far as I just figured it was a one and done, unique thing. And who's going to win? Like, is the karate guy going to win? Is the jiu-jitsu guy going to win? Is the wrestler going to win? You know, and that's kind of like where my intrigue was just kind of like what's going to happen, and that was it. But you know, it's funny. I actually went to an indie show that night and watched it on tape when I got home. I did not watch it live. There was an indie show in San Jose, and at the indie show, everyone was talking about it. Oh my God. I mean, like had seen some of it, and it was just like, they were telling me all, it's like, Hoist Gracie just choked everybody. You know, and then I went home and watched, and Hoist Gracie choked everybody. So, that, including Ken, and who they called Wayne Shamrock, you know, because of his Japanese name. That was his Japanese name because the deal was, I mean, they may have called him Ken Wayne Shamrock. I'm not sure what they did.
I think so. I think that's what they did.
Yeah, I think they called him Ken Wayne Shamrock because his Japanese name was Wayne Shamrock at first, later Ken Shamrock. And the reason he was Wayne Shamrock was because Ken Shamrock did a tour of All Japan Pro Wrestling early in his career. And when UWF brought him in, they did not want people to think that they had brought in a fake pro wrestler, because they were real, even though they were doing pro wrestling, but they claimed that they weren't, or they claimed that they were doing real, whatever. So and because they were going to push him, they didn't want some guy who'd done all these jobs in All Japan, so, you know, with that name, so they made him change his name to Wayne Shamrock. So that's where he first, so then when he starts in UFC, it's Ken Wayne Shamrock, you know, before they drop the Wayne.
So before this show, have you figured out what the deal is already? Which is it's really a showcase for Gracie Jiu-Jitsu?
Not before the show, no. Before the show, we're just kind of told whatever. There's a funny story. No matter how many times, Art Davey always tells the story, even though I've told him like 3 different times what this is all about. But he was always fascinated how Zane Bresloff, all these people, all these martial arts experts, this guy's going to win, this guy's going to win, this guy's going to win. Zane Bresloff goes up to him and goes, well, you know, it's between Ken Shamrock and Hoist Gracie. And Art Davies just like, he was right. How did he know? And it's like, I told him. I told Art Davies, I go, Zane calls me up and just goes, who's going to win? You know, he's going to bet on it, right? You know, I don't know where you could bet on it, but he wanted to bet on it. And I said, it's going to these fights are going to the ground. And it's Ken Shamrock or Royce Gracie. I didn't know enough about Royce Gracie to know that. I didn't know his family I knew of the Gracie family. I knew a little bit of it. But I didn't know all their history. I knew he was smaller than Ken. I knew that, you know, there was an experience edge that he would have, but Ken had done real fights and was a stud athlete. So I didn't know which one was going to win. If I had known everything, I probably would have just said, I probably would have figured out Royce based on experience, because the family experience, not necessarily his experience, but he's being trained by people who know what they're doing. And Ken is being trained by, you know, Suzuki and Funaki, and it's different rule set. They have an idea what they're doing, but they don't really know. And, you know, they don't know, you know, they'd never fought anyone with a gi. It's a different game. And, you know, and then just the experience level, you know, Ken was good against people who, at that point, who didn't know any submissions. Now he's going against a guy who knew submissions and knew it in a different way, in a more effective way than Ken's training, which Ken's people didn't really understand. Because it was one of the things with, the Gracies is that all of those guys that were trained under Karl Gotch thought that like they had this mystical knowledge of submissions that nobody else knew. And that's why, like, you know, when David Gobashvili came over in after the Olympics in like 1990, 1990, I think it was, whatever year it was, and he fought Minoru Suzuki or was it Kozlowski and Ken Shamrock? Oh, the same thing happened. Gobashvili was like gold, like, you know, he was the best amateur wrestler in the world. And he didn't like, you know, the Russians were bought to come here, but he didn't like the idea of losing this little Minoru Suzuki. You know, it's like so much smaller than him. And he complained about it, and Suzuki just goes, no one's here. I'll make a deal. You know, like, we'll go at it. If I beat you here in the, you know, with nobody around, I beat you at the Tokyo Dome. And if you beat me, you beat me at the Tokyo Dome. He's, oh yeah, for sure. I just want to, you know, I've won gold medal in the Olympics, you know, best amateur wrestler in the world. And Suzuki tapped him, and he went through with the deal. And Ken had the same thing with Kozlowski, who was an Olympian, and Ken was never a big national level wrestler, and Kozlowski's like, this guy was never even anything in wrestling, and I won. You know, I don't remember if he was. There were two brothers. I think Dwayne didn't place in the Olympics, but Dennis won a silver medal. So I think it was probably Dennis when this happened, and Ken tapped Dennis twice. You know, before Dennis would admit to, you know, that he should lose that match. So. Yeah, it was so they thought they were the shit, you know, like we were trained by Karl Gotch, and the god of pro wrestling, and we know submissions, and none of these guys know submissions, not realizing that down in Brazil, these guys have been doing it in real fights under real circumstances for decades. And we're so much more experienced at it and so much more advanced at it with their jiu-jitsu that, you know, there was someone better. I mean, I remember Frank going through a freaking depression when Rickson beat Funaki, because he'd trained under Funaki, and it was just like in his mind, I can beat anyone because I once, you know, whether Funaki gave him that win or not, I don't know, but he could hang with Funaki, and he was trained by Funaki, and he was really good. And they thought, you know, like, we can beat the Gracies because we come from the Karl Gotch side, you know what I mean? Not this Gracie side. And when Funaki, you know, who was physically beat up by then, but still the way he toyed with Funaki on, like in a standing fight, I think Funaki could do real well with Rickson. But the minute it got to the ground, I mean, Rickson tapped him right away. And it was just sort of like, you know, it's like that religion thing where you know, and later people had the Gracie religion, you know, like nobody could ever beat the Gracies. Nobody, you know, that trained under the Gracies. And then people started beating the Gracies. And it's just like, that's just kind of the evolution of things. The evolution, people who are who grew up with a religion and thinking everything is like this, and then when it's not, they get very, very sad and upset, and which is actually sort of happening in pro wrestling right now.
When you look back at and I'm mostly reading this through all of the observers because I'm not super paying attention to the UFC at this point, but reading all of the stuff about how close they are to dying and how their shows are getting stopped and then they're getting pulled off of different pay-per-view is so amazing that they made it.
Amazing story. It's like 1 in a million. Maybe those odds are too small, but it's every bit of 1 in 100, if not more. It's like for them to be where they are now, it's less than 1%, because what happened, Joe Rogan used to say this. He even said it to me in some bar one night, and he used to say this line about, what if some crazy billionaire just bought this thing? because we both knew it could be huge, but it just wasn't going to happen. And at this point, like the political climate, because of John McCain, just wanted it banned, and he had a lot of power. And so cable companies stopped televising, even though it was doing good business for them. I mean, it was really unfair. Bob Meyerowitz, greenlit the concept. It was a winning concept, for sure, that would have lasted forever. But he just got beat down at every turn. I mean, he never would have made it as big as these guys did, but it would have been a sustainable concept. And then, it goes down, and then the Fertittas, buy it and everything. And they struggled for years, because that period from 97, when they got booted off pay-per-view for the most part, to 2001, it's like that audience just kind of flitted away. And when they came back in 2001, we all thought, I remember talking to Dana and I don't think I was talking to Lorenzo back then, but I was certainly talking to Dana. And we were like, okay, as soon as you get on pay-per-view, you're going to go in there and, you're going to be up there doing your 100,000 buys at first, and then you're going to grow it to 200, and it's going to be big money making. And then they went out there and they're doing 30 and 50, even with the whole country open, they opened it up, but they were not drawing, other than the Shamrock and Tito fight did well, which kind of kept them alive. And then they were just losing money like crazy. I think there was a Tito Chuck fight that did pretty well as well. But so occasionally Tito with the right opponent could draw. But, once they got on, so, at this point, it's almost like, even with Lorenzo's billions or whatever he was worth then, maybe, whatever, I don't know if he was a billionaire yet, but he was certainly worth a lot of money. I mean, they were ready to throw in the towel. They were losing money. It wasn't working. And, the Ultimate Fighter idea, obviously, and this is and that's Joe Silva, because the original idea was going to be a Dana White reality show called The American Promoter.
Yes.
And that's the show they were going to do. And it would be Dana White wheeling and dealing, but it would not have fights or anything like that. And that show, whether, even airing after wrestling, without the fights, it would have never been a big deal. And they would have been, it just wasn't it wouldn't have happened with that. And Joe Silva goes, we got to get fights on. And it was like this Trojan horse, because nobody would allow fights on TV. It just wasn't, the Fox Sports Net did one fight with Robbie Lawler. I don't know if you remember this. And it did great ratings. But they got so much flack for it that they never did a second one, even with that. So we knew it could draw ratings. It was already proven, but nobody would touch it because it's too violent and this and that. So you had to sneak it on with this guise of a reality show, and that was Joe Silva's concept, that you sneak the fights on and the people will see the fights, and then it will take off. And thanks to Chris Lieben and Josh Koscheck, and then later Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonner, those two fights, I mean, that's where UFC came from. It was those two fights. If those two fights don't happen, I think Griffin Bonner, even with that, if that fight doesn't happen, I think that we still end up in the same place. Dana White will argue differently. I think that we still would have ended up exactly where we did. Without Lieben and Koscheck, which really picked up that whole, that kind of like became a water cooler feud for a week. And and really built ratings on that show so big. And then they did the pay-per-view, the Randy Chuck pay-per-view that did like almost 300,000 buys. And the previous one without TV had done, I think, 48,000. It was like, oh my God, you went up like 5 to 6 times due to TV. And at that point it was like, that's what TV, that's what TV meant. And then, then you had that whole great 2006 year with, the Tito and Griffin and Tito and Chuck and Tito and Shamrock and Hoist Gracie and Matt Hughes. And that's, really what, put it over the top.